Level up your LA Kings experience with Vivid Seats Elite Seats. All the on-ice Kings action with even more exclusive access and rewards. Enjoy great seats to the game in Section 103 along with Yamava Club access and parking included with your purchase. Plus, get a free Team LA Kings shop item at the game. Score your Vivid Seats Elite Seats tickets today and earn perks on each purchase from the only leading ticket company with a rewards program. Experience it live with Vivid Seats, the official partner of the LA Kings. Did you know the LA Kings have their own culinary partner? It's Superfood, celebrating 10 years and over 1 million meals served. Since 2020, the Kings have trusted Superfood to fuel their players. Now through Simply Lunch, you can bring that same performance-driven food to your office. Because when people eat better, they work better. Visit mysuperfood.com. That's mysuperfd.com. Or call 213-973-6145. Qualified companies can enjoy a free lunch for up to 10 managers.
You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings. Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
All right, we are continuing to look ahead to the 2026 NHL Entry Draft. Joining us again, Will Scouch. How are you doing today, Will?
Doing well, Mr. Cohen. How are you?
Excellent, thank you. And I think the last time we spoke, I told you that I had my eye on a Finnish prospect as my dream pick for Kings' first-round pick.
Correct.
I've already spoken and published an episode talking to Krister Kasarainen about Finnish prospects. We already talked about Oliver Savanto. That's I don't know why, I just decided arbitrarily. But today we're going to look at the NCAA because I didn't really realize this, but I have sort of, over the last 2 or 3 weeks, come to realize that apparently it's common knowledge, and I'm just behind the curve on this one, way behind the curve. The NCAA is widely apparently considered better than the CHL. And I asked Mark Yannetti that question point blank, director of amateur scouting for the LA Kings. I just said, I watched the Memorial Cup. I wasn't terrifically impressed. Is the NCAA better than the CHL? And he laughed and said, yeah, of course it is, just by age distribution. He said the youngest player on an NCAA team might be 3 years older than the oldest player on a CHL team. And that's just going to result in, better play. So I said, oh, okay, fine. So we're looking at, having said all that, we're going to get into the NCAA. Mm-hmm. Before we hit record, I cleared with you that we're not going to talk about Keaton Verhoff, a right shot defenseman from North Dakota, just because the likelihood of him falling to 17 seems every list I've seen has him ranked in the top 10, if not higher. And my previous hang-ups about the likelihood of the Kings drafting a right shot defenseman, although, like I said, Mark Yannetti contradicted that belief, so whatever. But that means that we are going to start with I've lost the player. Tynan Lawrence, I believe, is his name.
That is his name, yes.
So 6 foot, 183 pounds, center, playing at Boston University. What do we know about Tynan Lawrence?
Anybody who reads my work or watches my show will know by now that I'm a huge Tynan Lawrence fan. I think.
Let me jump in. I should say, still unlikely that he would fall to the Kings, but not in the realm of possibility.
I don't think it's impossible.
Okay.
But it is unlikely. But if he is there at 17, I would require double knee replacement from running up to the stage so fast to draft a player like Tynan Lawrence.
Gotcha.
Especially for the Kings. I think he is right up their alley in terms of the type of player that I think not only they really like, but they really kind of need more of, especially now with Kopitar leaving. I say nothing but the craziest things in people's ears about Tynan Lawrence. I think he is the biggest, I don't know how else to put it, but the biggest winner in the class. He just through sheer force of will and sheer speed and sheer energy, he wins games. Going back to the Hlinka Gretzky Cup this year, I remember watching, I think it was a semifinal game against the States where Canada should have won that game. And it was strictly basically because of Tynan Lawrence in the third period against Brady Noling in the U.S. net, and Brady Noling won that battle. And Tynan Lawrence went to Muskegon. He spent the first chunk of the year injured. But when he came back, if he had played a full season, he probably would have had a 40-goal season, maybe a 80, 90-point season in the USHL, one of the scoring leaders in that league. And after the new year, he left and went to Boston University and spent the rest of the year there, and all of a sudden everybody jumped off the wagon. To me, look, I think about it this way, right? Like, we're talking about NCAA players. It's a very unusual time to be doing what I'm doing because there are, I believe, 5 17-year-olds coming out of the NCAA this year. We're going to talk about 4 of them, I believe, and Verhoff. And I think ever in the NCAA's history, there have been 28 of them. And I think 3 more of those were last year. So you're seeing a large group of 17-year-olds now jumping into a very difficult environment. And so for me, I was reading in The Athletic today that there were quotes from scouts being like, I think the decision for Lawrence to go to BU was a disaster. And I'm just thinking, like, that is absurd because, like, what do we want? Do we want kids to challenge themselves and put themselves out of their comfort zone? Or do we want them playing junior hockey when they're going to light it up and score a cajillion points and dominate, right? Like, how would we feel about Gavin McKenna if he went to Medicine Hat this year instead of Penn State, right? He could have scored 160 points this year. Like, what would we say? And so when I look at Lawrence, I see a guy who also towards the end of the year was looking a lot more comfortable. He did look uncomfortable with BU early on, but he was put in a tough role. Welcome to college halfway through the year. Here's a top 6 center job. Here's Cole Eiserman on your wing. Here's Ryder Ritchie. Make them more successful. And it was like, all right, I guess I'll do that, right? And I think towards the end of the year, and Jay Pandolfo, the coach of the team, would agree that Lawrence was just sort of getting his game going, really just sort of getting moving, and then they got eliminated. And so for Lawrence, for me, he's one of the guys that I think is right up at the top of the entire class. He's a guy where if I'm coaching him, I never have to worry about him, really. I can tap him on the back, send him over the boards, penalty kill, power play, even strength. I could put him out there and have a job for him to do. And if I'm an opponent, he's a tough player to insulate and isolate. So for me, that's a very rare thing to find in the draft, especially in a draft that's a little soft on centers. And it just is, I'm really passionate about it because it's really a core frustration that people will apply a standard to a player like that. And, we expect players to have this like honor and integrity of like, well, you're an athlete to challenge yourself. And then they do so. And it's like, I guess I guess this won't work anymore. And so for me, it's like, it's just, I think there's so much runway with him. I mean, there are players that will be drafted this year in the first round that will not play an NCAA game until he's a junior. Like, I just think that that's a crazy advantage that he's getting, especially for a center. And I honestly don't think he's that far back from the guys that'll hear their names called in the top 5, I would say.
How much of this is just a natural result of the explosion of attention to the draft, right? Like, I can't remember who was it, Shane Wright, that fell a few spots a few years ago, where it's like for years that was, he was known as the guy who was going to go first. But then the longer runway you have and the more eyeballs you have on these kids, just naturally, the more opportunities you're going to have to see them fall short of these glorified expectations that you might build up to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge part of it. I mean, I know I've spoken to a number of people in the NHL about that like over scouting can be a thing where you start to really, I think that's starting to maybe happen a little bit even with a Gavin McKenna. And I have been personally quite critical of McKenna's game throughout the entire season, but I get the feeling that like he has come a long way in his game this year. And there's a lot of things that you can sort of look at and go, okay, like, yeah, there are flaws, but like everybody has flaws and there's going to be something there and you can sort of lean into it. And it's not like he's been a disappointment this year at all. It's just, I think, but in any case, I agree. I think especially I also this season have put my chips on the table that I am thinking about this whole class and the whole landscape a little differently. And going, I think it's a very radical shift that we've been through where all of these CHL players that were first round picks last year and the year before who are now in the NCAA, when normally they would be back in the CHL, has given the NCAA an enormous boost. And I think it's funny that you mentioned that Mark Yannetti like laughed when you said that, like it's just like the NCAA has taken such a positive step thanks to these rule changes. And so for me, seeing that happen at the same time as now 17-year-olds also choosing to make that jump into that environment is not only a benefit for the NCAA, but it's also a benefit for like people like me who evaluate these players because you do get to see them outside of their comfort zone. You see them, you may have seen them when they're 16, 17 years old playing kids that are also 16, 17, 18 years old. But then all of a sudden overnight, they're playing some of the toughest hockey out there.
Yeah.
And so
and 22 and 23 year olds.
Yeah, and 22, 23, even 24-year-olds. And so for me, I look at that and I just go, that is a fascinating environment to explore. Mm-hmm. And it's why I'm a little higher on Verhoff, I think, than some people. It's why I'm way higher on Lawrence than a lot of people. Like a few of the guys that we're going to talk about today, I'm pretty high on relative to a lot of people. And I think it's just because of the difficulty of that environment and the trust that over the next couple of years, it's only going to do positive things for these guys.
All right. Well, the next name on our list that you may be super high on is Oscar Hemming. 6'4", 204 pounds. So we don't have to worry about size.
No.
Playing at Boston College. What else do we know about Oscar Hemming?
Honestly, one of the most interesting cases of the year. I mean, he spent the first half of a season trying to find a place to play. You know, there was all of these commitments and all of this stuff flying around about who had his rights and who he was going to play for and all that stuff. And then,
I should point out, by the way, he is also Finnish. But
yes, he is also Finnish. Yes,
but playing at the NCAA.
Yes, and so he ended up out of nowhere. I feel like just being like, you know what, I'm going to go to college. And it was like I was surprised by that because I'm thinking like, here's a kid who is barely eligible for this draft class. He is a very, very young player, a player who I didn't really think showed like the level of play at the Hlinka Gretzky in last year that I would go, yes, definitely ready for the NCAA. And I think that came forward a little bit with Boston College this year. I think Hemming was one of these guys we're going to talk about today who I think was trailing maybe not the expectations, but looking a little bit out of place. But that's not to say he was a bad performer at all. Like I've done a few games of him. I've taken a look at him pretty clearly. And he's a guy that I think has a lot of runway to develop, obviously because of his age, but also like I always had notes on him from last year as a shooter and just as a raw goal scorer that has size and physicality and all of this stuff. And there just wasn't a whole lot of evidence that he was a huge shooting threat yet at the NCAA level. And I think there are reasons for that. But the really positive thing was everywhere else in his game, especially defensively, like really physical, really good forechecker, hard on forechecks, good in the defensive zone too, as a defensive winger, just a really good two-way impact for a guy in an environment that was definitely a huge leap from where he was last year. So it's one of these things where if there's a team that is out there that looks at an Oscar Hemming and goes, you know what, if we believe in this guy, like, and we think maybe in the early parts of the first half, not the early first half of the first round, but, you know, around the top 10, top 15 range, right before LA picks, I could see a team being like, yeah, let's take a bet on this guy. But, you know, if he goes around LA's pick or to LA specifically, it also could be something that makes a lot of sense. I think he just has this very interesting background and this very interesting story and set of skills that I have. It's one of these things where it's like he's more of a curiosity. He just didn't play enough for me to get a really good read on him, and the results that I got on him weren't incredible enough for me to be like, this is definitely his job. But he very clearly has a lot of ingredients going for him. He's very young, he's very big, he's very physically developed, he's very physical, he's a good forechecker. So all of those ingredients are good to start with. And where he goes from here, I have no idea. But based on the way he produces offense in the games that I've seen going back to last year, there's one right here for this guy. And so some teams might really see that as well and jump on him pretty quick. But in this range, I feel like this is around where he'll go. And he'd be a very interesting bet for him. I have him around this range.
The Athletic has him at number 17, and this is neither here nor there. But the Finnish team he belongs to is Keiko Espoo, which is Rimpanen's team. So there's an outside chance, although I think they probably only played a handful of games together because Rimpanen was on the adult team and Hemming was on the under 20 team, I think.
Sure.
But it's an outside possibility that Kings scouts who went to see Rimpanen may have seen Hemming inadvertently. Yeah. And then in Boston College, you know, Mark Yannetti, that's his home turf, and the Kings are well represented in that area when it comes to scouting. So they probably have laid eyes on him more than enough times to have a good sense of who he is and what he brings. The next player we're going to focus on is Ilya Morozov. I'm assuming I'm saying that correctly.
Yes.
6'2.75" is what he's listed at by the Athletic. And well, again, this is neither here nor there. I asked Mark, I said, how sure are we on the heights of players these days? And he insisted that if the player goes to the combine, we know their heights. But I will maintain, and we'll maintain this until somebody takes out a tape measure in front of me and the cameras are rolling. I for decades will have been telling people that I'm 5'10". I've spent a lot of time in hospitals over the last calendar year. For everybody who's listening, everybody knows I had cancer and all that nonsense. So I got measured. I had my vitals taken and got measured plenty of times. And it turns out that on a good day, I'm 5'9". And I was crestfallen to discover that, but it turns out I'm 5'9". And I'm telling you, there are guys in the LA Kings locker room who are listed at 6 foot and 6'1", who when I am standing next to them talking to them, I am taller than them.
Yeah.
And there is just no shot that some of these guys are how tall they are. So Morozov is listed at 6'2" and 7.75. Like Quentin Byfield, Sammy Hellenius, those guys are tall. I have no
indisputably,
doubt.
Yes.
But 6 foot is and like Brant Clark's listed at 6'2", and I'm like, yeah, maybe. Maybe.
Yeah, that one always
Kopitar at 6'3", I believe it.
Yeah.
Jeff Carter at 6'4", whatever it was, I believe it. So anyways, the point is 6'2", 205 pounds, playing at Miami University. We've already talked this season about guys with names that would make you assume that they were from one place or another. I'm assuming Ilya Morozov is from Russia, but I've made that mistake before. What do we know about Ilya?
You know what? Again, similar to Hemming, a very interesting player. He's been in the States for a while, but he is a Russian, so you're good on that. It's kind of both. But a really interesting player. Another one that I was surprised that jumped straight to the NCAA this year, but I think Morozov is a very interesting case study for future players, where Miami University was not the top program in the country, but they gave him a job and they gave him a role right away. And they gave him a job that I think he did very well in. I think the point production is a little misleading. I think a lot of it came in the first few games of the year, and I watched some of those games, and it's not really his bread and butter. I don't think he's going to be a huge offensive guy, but I think that what he does do is the physical side of the game. His skating ability, I think, took some good steps over the course of the year. He looked a lot more comfortable and fluid in the flow of an NCAA game, which was not easy this year. That level got very quick and very fast and very physical, very fast. Not that it wasn't before, but I think he brings a lot of really intriguing overall ability to the game. He moves the puck pretty smart for a guy his size. You wouldn't expect it for a guy like him. He's, I think, a pretty good skater. Some fundamentals training, that skills training side of things, trying to get through defensive layers a little bit more. That would be a huge upside thing for me with him. I'd want to see where he goes with that. But again, it's the fascinating thing about this year is that these 17-year-olds in the NCAA, you're kind of looking through the lens of like, well, what would they look like if next year was their freshman year? And so it's almost this like completely unknown territory. So to see a player that not only is just big, it's not just that he's big, but he does have a pretty good ability to get around the ice, play a good defensive game. He's a supportive player for the guys that he plays with. And, he wouldn't be the sexiest pick that you could possibly make, but I have him in this, like him and Hemming are really close on my board. And I think that they have, again, really interesting upside potential. He's in a less visible area of the NCAA. You don't hear too much about Miami University. They weren't amazing this year. But that gave him an opportunity. And I think that a lot of kids are looking at MSU and they're looking at Michigan and they're looking at these big schools. They want to be at the top programs. And even if they're a bottom pair guy, that's where they want to be. If they're a bottom six guy, that's where they want to be. But I'm sitting here going like, successful players have come from other places too. And they can offer you a pretty good opportunity. And Morozov is a good example of that. And I think that over the course of this season, he was a little out of his depth early on, not really impacting the game a whole lot. But the last few games of him I saw gave me a lot more confidence in that at least there's like a floor as a NHL maybe center like down the lineup somewhere and capable of playing the physical game at that level and doing pretty well at it. And if there's more there, then great. That would be a huge plus. But another interesting one for sure. And again, similar to Hemming and Lawrence, very young for this draft class. Like he's a summer birthday. And that, to me, at least, is also a plus on the resume.
I'm going to make something up here right now.
Go for it.
I don't believe that the Kings would take a player drafted in this draft and put them into the lineup this season, the 26-27 season. Like, it just doesn't track with how they operate. Taking a first round pick in the middle, second half of the first round and putting them directly into the spot on the NHL roster is relatively rare. Having said that, unless the Kings can either pull off some sort of miracle trade or some sort of miracle free agent signing, which I can't even fathom what it would be because the free agent market is just that bare. Right. So, I mean, barring some sort of miracle trade, they need another center. Does that put any extra stock on players like Morozov over somebody like Hemming, given that Hemming's a wing and Morozov is a center? Like, having, again, I do not believe that they would do it. But I mean, is it even within the realm of possible? Like, does that help? I mean, and especially with the Kings, where they have a very specific philosophy of best player available, don't draft for need.
Yeah,
but the franchise need at center is so glaring at this point.
I mean, I'm sure it's a consideration. I'm not part of the scouting staff, so I don't know for sure. But if I were, I would think about it. And I think that in the middle of the first round this year, I don't know, like I think there are a lot of good centers you could take swings on, especially if you don't expect them to be elite level players. Like, I don't think that's a reasonable expectation for anybody relatively drafted outside the top 15, like where LA is. I think there are good ones that will fall through the cracks and be one of these guys available later on. And I think, I mean, I think that in my opinion, like a lot of the guys that you would be focusing on here, like Hemming or Morozov or whatever, like you're looking at maybe 2 years away anyway. You're not looking at a guy who's probably cracking the NHL at 18 or 19 2 years from now, right? I don't think that's what's going to happen. But do I think they could make the leap pretty quickly after college? Sure, they have all the physical tools are there, all the fundamentals that you kind of need to stay afloat, especially based on some of the guys that the Kings have played down their lineup, some of those more physical, like bigger guys that just are solid role players. Yeah, I think it's possible, but I always tend to think like you're trying to fix a hole in your lineup that exists now with players that you won't see until 2028, 2029. And that is a little bit of a strategic question mark for me. But I mean, yeah, I agree though. Like it is a bit of an organizational gap, and drafting guys like this, I think there's a relative level of comfort knowing that you're going to get something out of them, even if they're not super, super high end players for your organization.
I mean, in the back of my head, as we're talking about this, I'm just thinking, even if it is 2 or 3 years before the guy makes the lineup, if you were to take someone like Morozov or Savanto or, one of these 6'2", 6'3" guys, whoever the Kings get to complement Quentin Byfield down the middle, just based on the marketplace right now, it's not going to be somebody in their early to mid 20s. Like, I just don't see how even Dylan Larkin, who is, approaching 30, like, I just don't see how it happens given what the acquisition cost would be and all that. So like, I just see this world where the Kings go out and land a veteran, somebody in their late 30s where you go, okay, it'll be a bridge situation where, and now, as we're recording this on the 8th, we find out that the coaching situation may have been resolved in LA. It looks like a 3-year deal for Peter Laviolette is being reported. And so even then you go like, all right, well, we're looking at small windows here. So maybe you don't draft a guy for, October 5th, but maybe you draft a guy for October 5th, 2027. I don't know.
I mean, that's always the strategy to me is you're thinking about, and that's kind of why in my strategic world, I always end up just thinking like, I want the players to check as many boxes as I can find. Right. I just want to worry about the lineup when they are ready. Like I'll worry about that later. Right now, my focus is try to hit as big of a home run as I can with as many guys as I can and think about all that other stuff later on. So in that sense, like I agree with you. I think that I don't know what the solution is. My landscape understanding is more about the draft and not every team in the NHL and everything like that. So I think that might be where you might go for the like you said, the stopgap, and you try to just focus on through the draft, just going like, all right, we kind of know what we want. Maybe even flipping the pick, like there's probably NHL teams out there that have an extra guy they can't afford. And maybe this is just how you turn a pick that could be Ilya Morozov into a player that Ilya Morozov could be in 5 years. You know what I mean? So you never really know.
It's so heartbreaking because I don't like the idea of constantly trading picks. And one of the conversations, or one of the things we touched on in my conversation with Mark Yannetti, was like how many years they didn't even have a first round pick. So I was asking about retroactive evaluations, and I was like, what about, a Gabe Perreault or a Jimmy Snuggerud? And I was like, didn't Gabe Perreault fall down, and didn't you guys try to move up to get him? And Mark was like, no, we didn't have our pick that year. And I was like, oh, right, of course. But having said that, if the Kings wanted to move 17, the amount of other teams ahead of them in the draft that I have heard are willing to be flexible and move their pick. If I'm in the market to improve my draft stock and I know that Florida's got 9 or the Kings have 17, well, I know who I'm targeting if I can. I mean, not that Florida necessarily will move number 9, but I mean,
you never know. There's a market.
If those are my options, that's where I'm focusing.
It's an exciting year regardless. I mean, I think there's not only a lot of pretty good players available throughout for a long stretch of this draft. I think there's a lot of good ones, but there's a lot of teams that historically have done very well that are in that meaty middle or in the lottery, like Toronto's drafting one. There's all of this weird stuff going on, right? Montreal is going to not be in the top end. Anaheim went to the playoffs this year. So there's this churn. And I think now you're seeing teams. I think that usually I'm the one who's like, trading down never happens. Trading picks super high never really happens. But if there was a year where it actually sounds like there's a market incentive for teams to actually think about it seriously and consider it, even for the teams that are drafting very high, stockpiling more picks later on, I know that there are a couple of teams trying to think about it.
I've heard rumors and talk of 4 teams in the top 10 being willing to trade their pick, and another 3 or 4 in the next 10. And it's just, I mean, like, okay.
Yeah. And I think that's always kind of the case. Teams are always probably like, well, of course we want more picks. But I think this is a year where you could create a world where teams have a good reason to trade down and teams have a good reason to trade up and mix things around, just because it's a weird kind of year like that. And I think that extends to a team like LA, where they are in that sort of meaty middle and they are in a position where they don't want to keep thinking.
I appreciate the use of the word meaty instead of mushy, by the way.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, they made the playoffs. I mean, that's meatier than mushier. You know what I mean? So,
I guess. Mushy middle has become a very popular phrase around the fan base. Before we move out of the first round, are there any other NCAA prospects we need to touch on before we get to one last name who may be available in the second round?
I mean, I think that's pretty much all of them. The only other one is Verhoff, and I would be very shocked if he were there at 17.
Yeah, I'm teasing this interview that's coming later with Mark Yannetti, but I asked Mark if trading up were a possibility, and he said not likely.
Yeah.
He said, that's the thing that I always laugh when people ask questions in the off season, is the answer, of course, is always, well, we'll have to see.
Yeah.
Like, who knows? Never say never, but generally speaking, I asked him about moving up. I said, if a guy falls out of the top 10 and you really like him, and he was like, we'd have to really like him.
Yeah.
I was like, right.
Really depends on the player. But
exactly.
Most of the time I'd be like, I don't know, just see who's there.
That's essentially what he said, is that, for what you're going to be able to get at 17, you might as well, it's not going to be much better at 13 or 14 or whatever. So.
Yeah.
Anyway, the last player we're going to talk about is Adam Valentini. And the reason I included him is that I'm looking at the Athletic rankings right now. They have him ranked at 53. The Kings have 46 and 49, which says to me that it's entirely possible that Valentini, so the Kings work in tier systems, they create tiers, and then based inside those tiers, they have their own internal rankings. So for example, goalie might be, if they have a tier of players, they might rank the goalie last just based on organizational depth or other factors. But anyway, it's possible. Valentini is a center. Now he's 5 foot. He's listed at 5'9" 3/4", 183 pounds. So he's slight, as they say. I don't think that should be held against him, but I don't know anything about him as a player. What kind of player is Adam Valentini?
I mean, look, I'm from Ontario, and the Adam Valentini saga up here has been one for the ages.
Okay.
Like in the summer, he was in the NCAA or USHL last year. This year, the team in I can't remember who had his rights, but they traded his rights for the OHL to Kitchener, who went on to win the Memorial Cup. He showed up to Kitchener's camp in the summer for, I think, 2 days or something, and then cut and ran to Michigan and went straight into the college.
Okay.
And Kitchener, obviously, rightfully, I would argue, was kind of a little miffed about that and was a little bit, they used the word disappointed. And I think that turned off a lot of NHL teams. I think a lot of people saw that as some sort of a dishonor, some sort of a bad decision or something. And look, I don't know exactly what happened. I don't know why he did what he did, but I think that's a reason why I think Valentini said all 32 teams interviewed him at the Combine, all of them. And I think that's a big reason why. Teams kind of wanted to probably hear it straight from the horse's mouth of like, what the hell's going on? What happened there? Like, what's the deal? Because a lot of people talk, a lot of people just make stuff up and whatever. And I think we're kind of, I'm already getting off the point of like the player himself, but I think he's one of the more undervalued guys out there. And I think a lot of it stems back to the fact of him saying he was, or actually appearing to be going to the OHL this year to play for a great team, and then pulling the rug out from under them pretty much right away and going to Michigan. And I mean, some would argue not necessarily having a season that everybody expected for a guy that was a top OHL pick and expected to be a leader on a very good team there. But I think with Valentini, there are some things about his game that I think are some of the issues that come with these smaller, slighter guys. I think he's a bit too perimeter oriented. I think he's a bit too overconfident at times. He kind of like playing the college level, like the physicality of that level and how quickly guys can close gaps on a guy, even like Valentini, who's not slow at all. It's a lot to handle. And I think that he had some up and down games. There were some games I saw of him where he was very good, and some games where I could have skipped the whole thing and not missed much from him. And but that said, I think also you did see him kind of come alive a little bit and discover a side of his game over the course of this season that I didn't really expect, which was like he has this like grind to him. He has this like get under your skin, mess with your head, like kind of just running around and crushing guys. And he has that like really, really annoying style of play.
Pest?
Yeah, like a little bit of that. And you know, like running guys after a bit of a little too late after they make a play, or, you know, going a little bit too hard below the goal line and all that stuff where you're just like, I don't think you're breaking any rules, but like if I had to play against you, you'd be kind of annoying me a little bit. And so I personally, I love that about him. And sometimes it's the smaller guys that play like that, but I don't remember seeing that with him last year in Chicago. So with him though, he combines that with, I think, a really good skill level with a really great shot. I think there's a really good sort of fundamental offensive game there with him. But the thing that gave me a lot more confidence was later on in the year, towards the end of the year, seeing him play this very interesting just energy role. This really rambunctious little guy. He's not that small, but he is undersized, I would say. But he doesn't play like it. And I always like players like that because they're the ones that I think kind of fly under the radar. They kind of get underrated. They think, oh, it's not going to work at higher levels, but it's like, well, he's already playing for the University of Michigan. He's been playing there all year and he didn't have a bad year on paper. So there's stuff there to chew on. And if he's there in the second round for LA, you know, you wouldn't have to twist my arm to go for it.
That was going to be my question, is given that the Kings have two picks, close to 50, 46 and 49, if he was available, and if in fact it turns out that he did fall out of favor because of some mysterious, you know, whatever happened with Kitchener, who knows? And like, to be clear, I find the discourse around when players make decisions like this fascinating, right? I was watching, just to make it about NHL players, I was watching some random video of some random Detroit radio show, and the hosts were saying that they thought Larkin's behavior was loser behavior. And I was like, well, I don't know about that, right? You can feel however you want about it. I wouldn't apply the word loser to it. I mean, he signed a contract, so you can feel however you want about him backing out of the contract. But, you know, Jordan Spence asked for a trade in the with 1 year left on his contract when it is revealed that he would not be a regular player in the lineup every night. And people want to have these high-minded conversations about it, or, you know, Brock Faber refuses to come out of college. And I just look at it and I go, listen, Brock Faber's decision to not sign with the LA Kings, say what you want about it or whatever you believe his motivation was out of it. He is currently on an 8-year contract that's going to give him generational wealth, because the decision he made put him on the path to get that contract. Like, these guys have one shot in their lives to go from, you know, the guy who gets free beers in Sudbury every night for the rest of his life to guys, you know, who can buy and sell small islands in the Pacific.
Right. Yeah.
And they and it's based on whether or not they play their cards right, you know, the few moments they have them available to them. So I have no idea what happened with Kitchener Valentini, but there's a long way of getting to the question. If that is why he's actually available in the second round, given that the Kings have 2 picks, does that improve his value as a gamble to take?
I mean, I would. This is the part of this whole exercise of doing the draft work that I wish I could do more of, which is like picking their brain away from cameras and away from, because like I think I, as a person, am a little more forgiving of stuff like what you're talking about, where like I guess people are they feel a certain way when something like that happens, and I get why. But I also am of the belief that like people have reasons for doing the things that they choose to do.
Yeah.
And
lots
I think
and lots of money.
Well, that yes, I'm sure that was part of it, right? Like I'm sure Michigan was like, "Are you sure you don't want to come right away? We want you, and we'll give you X," you know. And I mean, at the same time, I look at Valentini, and on a team like Kitchener, I mean, they still won the Memorial Cup anyway without him, so that's not so bad,
right?
But you know, if he had gone to the OHL, I mean, there's part of me that also just goes, well, he was good in the USHL last year. Maybe he just kind of was like, well, they're going to offer me money. It's a great school. I'd just rather be there. You know, maybe he just didn't like the vibe he was picking up in Kitchener. And if you ask him honestly, away from cameras and everything, and if he told me and he was just like, well, I wanted a challenge. I didn't think it was going to be that challenging for me. You mentioned off the top of the show, you didn't think the Memorial Cup was the greatest hockey around. And I would say that compared to the Frozen Four where Valentini was playing, if he played like that in the OHL, he could have had an enormous season there.
Right.
And if he did have an enormous season there, are we talking about him as a surefire first-round pick? And to me, if the answer to that is yes, then he's a first-rounder to me. And so for me with him, I would be curious to see what he says. But when I always do this from my perspective, I always just go off of the player as they are. Well, how do they play? What do they do out there? And can they help me win games? And when I look at Valentini, especially towards the end of the year, I'm looking at him and I'm going like, this guy is just barrel of monkeys. He is a little bit crazy out there. And maybe you could rein him in a little bit, but like he'll be at Michigan for a while again. Otherwise, normally he would be a freshman next year. So he's coming in with a year of experience and, you know, he'll have that as a benefit, and it's Michigan. They're going to still have a good team. So I like where he's headed. And I think, again, like it does increase the value if he is a mid to late second round pick. Like if he's the third guy I'm picking, I'm thrilled. I think that you could do so much worse than that guy being the third guy off your list. And yeah, I mean, I think that even if it doesn't necessarily, the offense doesn't develop to the point where you might want to have seen it based on where he was when he was 15, AAA hockey, the USHL, I still think the floor is there with the work rate, the energy, the physicality in his game. Like he doesn't play afraid. He may be a little undersized, but he doesn't play like he's scared. And I think that that's a huge positive for a guy that may be a little bit undersized like him. So that does give him value too.
All right, well, that is going to wrap up our look at prospects. We've looked at the CHL, Finland, and the NCAA, which of course means that the Kings are just going to go with all Swedes and Czechs this draft.
Yeah.
they'll hit every blind spot. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They'll take some kid out of Norway or something.
Yeah.
Denmark. Will Scouch, a pleasure as always. And again, for anybody who wants, I'm currently blanking on the address, but scouchsim.com I think is what it is.
That's the one.
It's such a fun tool to simulate the draft, and you can check everything Will does out at scouching.ca. He's on YouTube, he's on social media. Will, a pleasure as always. Thank you so much.
Anytime. Thanks.